Good morning and welcome to Ancient Broadcast. Today we'll be having guest speakers on the order of the Reformation and Renaissance.
But here's some basic information on the Renaissance and Reformation. The Renaissance began in the 15th century and continued until the 17th century. The Renaissance began due to a renewed love for Greek and Roman culture, which led to advancements in art and science. The Renaissance also brought around new ideas such as humanism. During the Middle Ages, there was an intense focus upon Christian ideals, values, and dependency on the church for all things. But humanism is the celebration of freedom, the world, and man, and the abilities of mankind. Humanism changed society. Humanist ideas included a change from the strict educational system of the church, and humanist studies included rhetoric, history, philosophy, grammar, literature, and poetry. These areas were studied with the aim of becoming a moral and well-rounded citizen. Humanists also had the aim of spreading and sharing knowledge. Donatello was a French sculptor and artist born in France in 1386. His creations were greatly influenced by his belief in humanist philosophies and antique art. His creation of the iconic David is a representation of his combination of classical and realistic styles. Donatello was also made famous for his creation of the shallow relief technique, which assists in capturing depth and creating perspective. In addition, his collaboration on the Florence Cathedral of Santa Maria del Fiore was a huge architectural achievement and still stands today, echoing Donatello's genius over Florence. These creations listed, and many more, are Donatello's legacy to the art world and greatly influenced other artists of the Renaissance, as well as continue to influence the work of modern-day artists.
Reformation is known as a religious movement in Europe around the 16th century. The Reformation began due to the disagreement between the Catholic Church. As a result of this disagreement, the Catholic Church split, creating the Protestant branch of Christianity. During the Reformation, the Catholic Church continued to grow politically and spiritually. This caused an uprising within the Church. There had been many critics of the Church and its practices in the preceding centuries. But in the 16th century, the spread of humanism, combined with renewed interest in the reforming religion, brought criticism of the church to a head. Indulgences were created due to the church's internal struggles. These were to be bought by sinners so that in the afterlife they were granted access to heaven. The church used these indulgences to their advantage and to the people's disadvantage. Many reformers became aware of these immoral acts and were unappeased with the church. Most historians choose to believe that the Renaissance preceded the Reformation, and there are some aspects of the Renaissance that influenced the birth of the Reformation. Ideas like humanism and the rebirth of the classical past, like reading, were contributing factors to the origination of the Reformation. The spread of humanism and reading began the Reformation, a movement for change in the Catholic Church.
However, this one man in particular played the key role. Martin Luther lived in a monastery for many years.
During this period, he read and came up with his own assumptions on the Bible. One was that God forgave and forgot, not that its followers had to pay the church in order to go to heaven. This was a huge revelation, because the norm was that the followers had to pay the church in order to be forgiven of their sins. The passage that he had found explained that each relationship between God and man was individual.
This meant that the church was not necessary or as important as it made itself become. Once Luther had discovered this, it was time to spread the news to society. People were astonished and confused by this revelation. Luther's discovery became the foundation of the Reformation.
At the age of 25, Queen Elizabeth I, the daughter of Henry VIII, became the Queen of England. Elizabeth lived a grueling childhood and was always in the line of danger. On November 17, 1558, Elizabeth was declared ruler of England, and even then, her safety was never confirmable. But Mary knew her, Elizabeth, to be at heart a Protestant, and Elizabeth's position throughout the reign was uneasy and sometimes perilous. When Elizabeth assumed Queen of England, England was in the midst of a war with France, and Elizabeth was in a difficult position. The navy had decayed, and there was no efficient army. Such was the new Queen's inheritance. Her first act was to appoint Sir William Cecil as her principal Secretary of State, and she thereby created the longest and perhaps the most successful partnership in government in English history.
First, she made peace with France in March 1559.
Shortly after, religion became a problem. Elizabeth created a religious settlement with the help of Parliament in 1559. The settlement did not seem to satisfy either party. Mary de Guise, Queen of Scots, and later France became Elizabeth's main enemy due to their religious differences.
After years of religious dispute, Elizabeth executed Mary for plotting the Queen of England's murder. The execution of Mary Stuart,
or Mary de Guise, immensely strengthened England, for it removed the only conceivable alternative to Elizabeth in the eyes of the English Catholics. This strengthened Elizabeth's reign tremendously. For 30 years, the time period of the Renaissance and Reformation is prone to strike up a conversation. Many historians, even today, are still debating which came first, the Renaissance or the Reformation, or both. I believe they happened to occur simultaneously. The Renaissance, which began in Italy, was a period of rebirth. During this time, the rich and flourishing states of Italy were inspired to shine a light on the classical past of the medieval world. They, medieval intellectuals, valued much about the classical past and laid the foundation for many of the cultural claims of the Renaissance. The Renaissance was a period of time after the Middle Ages that brought new ideas and innovation to modern day. Today, the Renaissance is viewed as a time of cultural change, while the Reformation was a religious battle between the Catholics and Protestants. The Reformation is always thought of succeeding the Renaissance. Most people know more about the Renaissance than the Reformation. The Reformation was a period of dissatisfaction with the Catholic Church in Europe. The Reformation was a religious revolution in Europe in the 16th century, fomented by dissatisfaction with the established Roman Catholic Church that led to the creation of the Protestant branch of Christianity. Historians describe the Renaissance as a long process of social, political, and religious change. It is important to understand the difference between the Renaissance and the Reformation. The Renaissance and the Reformation appear to have little in common. The Renaissance links the European experience to the classical past in one great continuum. The Reformation cuts across it as a unique divide. The contrast may be extended. The Renaissance of the 15th century was a secular, or at least it acknowledged that of the whole human history could not be contained entirely within a Christian framework. The Reformation was first and foremost a religious phenomenon, expressing criticism of the church and responding to ordinary believers' thirst for spiritual succor. The Renaissance was something to which all religions of Europe could relate, albeit in different ways. To that extent, the Renaissance tended to promote cultural unity. The Reformation demanded a stance for or against, and so proved profoundly divisive, setting Protestant North against Catholic
Others
South.
have different opinions on this issue. I believe that the Reformation preceded the Renaissance. The Black Plague occurred before the Renaissance, and its destructive power caused people to question their faith in the Catholic Church and God. Questions arose such as, is God punishing us, and has God forsaken us? This event was the first sign of the beginning of the Reformation. During this time, the only way to read the Bible was if a scholar or priest read it to you, as the Bible was only in Latin. The Reformation was paused as the Renaissance occurred, so that certain innovations such as the printing press enabling people to receive Bibles in the common language. Once this occurred, people were able to fully understand and comprehend the Bible while recognizing the faults of the church. Although the tangible actions of the Reformation started after the Renaissance, the mental state of the Reformation began before the Renaissance.
Now you may be curious of the global effect in the 21st century. The modern equivalent of the movement for Reformation by the Protestant Christians of the European Reformation is the Islamic Reformation, which is pushing to become aligned more directly with their holy scriptures rather than tradition. Prior to the creation of the printing press, the holy Islamic texts of the Quran and Hadith, which speak of the conversion from all other religions as well as the murder of those who refused to convert, were hard to come by because of the inadequate availability of literature, as were those literate in Arabic. Before 1787, the lack of availability and ability to translate the holy texts prevented many Muslims from completely understanding their whole religion. This led Islam to become more aligned with tradition rather than scripture due to the lack of direct interpretation. After the creation of the printing press, the holy texts were able to be recreated and circulated easier, creating a wider access to the Quran and Hadith, but the number of those who could correctly translate these texts were still limited until the numbers began to rise as modern times approached. With a larger population of those literate in Arabic, as well as a wider access to the holy texts, the traditional ways of the Muslims were found to be far from the direct teachings of the Quran. In 1787, many Muslims began to push for their religion to become more like that of scripture rather than tradition. Even so, the direct translation of much of the Islamic scripture was found very harsh and violent by many of those who had considered themselves Muslim. This, combined with the intolerance to convert from Islam by Islamic scripture, which states that all other religions are to be converted or killed, many are forced to conform with the Muslim population, which is gradually accepting the more harsh teachings of the Quran. This push to become more aligned directly with Scripture has led to the formation of the very radical group called ISIS, which terrorizes the world today. They use the Holy Islamic text to justify the murder, capture, and terrorism of not only Christians, but innocent civilians all around the world. Their actions have brought terror and pain to all who are aware or have come in contact with this radical branch of Islam, yet it still must remain a part of the present-day Islamic Reformation. The followers of ISIS are pushing to become more aligned with their interpretations of the Holy Scriptures, even though their actions are far more radical and unjustifiable despite their claims of justification by the Quran. Although more radical compared to the English Reformation, this Islamic religious Reformation is having the same effects on society today as the sense of a worldwide impact and major religious change. The similarity between the cause of these two religious movements have something in common, an inconsistency of ideas that sparked a push for change.